So this is exciting. I've done this before with different folks, and it's like my favourite thing because I get to pretend that I'm like, on a panel on TV interviewing fascinating people. And they are fascinating people, and they have stories to tell us. So now you've all got this piece of paper here that has the bios of the folks that we've got in front of us. So I'm not going to read those out to you again, but I'm going to say just a few little things about them. So Dr. David Pryor, sitting over there to the far right, he's a radiation oncologist, so we all know what that means, and he's done many amazing things. But I do just want to point out, and again, I always really take my hat off to clinicians who put their patients first. They're running around being hysterically busy all the time doing that, and then they're doing research as well, and they virtually never get paid for it. It's something they do out of passion. And what an interesting thing, an amazingly important thing that David is doing is he's the current chair of the Queensland Steering Committee for the Prostate Cancer Outcomes Registry, which is an incredible initiative. It sounds like a long name, and it is, but it tracks data on men treated for prostate cancer in this state, and there's one of these in the other states as well. And that's just part of collecting data that allows us to look at how we're doing on a population level with our patients. And it's an incredibly important research resource. So I just wanted to make a comment about that. And we have Darren, and you've got Darren's story there. And, goodness me, what a journey for you, really, with your dad and what happened with him, and then to have undergone this experience. And so we're all really looking forward to understand that, get a bit of a perspective from you. So my other confession is that I had to quickly look up my email to find my questions because I didn't print that out before I came, so I've scribbled it down. But we're going to kind of take this in a bit of a relaxed session. And I thought I'd start with you, David, and ask you to just talk to us about how you approach decision-making with patients. They've just been diagnosed, they've come to you. What's your approach with that to help them make good decisions?
I think it's like any conversation, you just have to start off with an understanding of where the person's at and then take it from there. And as you've seen, the number of choices is becoming astronomical, so not all of this is going to be appropriate to land on someone at the first instance. So in terms of those initial consults, a lot of it might just be that person getting through the initial slap in the face of being told they've got something. If they've already been told, they might just be going through the processing. So it's just a very, I guess, organic and two-way conversation that's going on. And then from there, just pick it up step by step. If this, then that. Have they understood this component of it, and then eventually, if we're down to treatment options, if it's the right time, I can start bringing in the clinical trial options. But it's highly variable, and we just, like any conversation with any human being, you try and work out where each other's at. So some people come in already knowing that they want this particular trial. Other people come in still, in denial and still very, just completely at a loss as to why this has happened to them. So sometimes you've got to start right back at the beginning, and then I guess the importance is to answer questions, give them time, and then also to make additional time. So sometimes you have to have 2-3 appointments over the couple of weeks to get to a stage where you could potentially discuss a clinical trial, for example. So it is highly individual.
That was going to be my next question. Do you talk about clinical trials earlier or down the track? So you're saying it's just very individual.
Yeah, it depends.
What do you think's the hardest thing for the average layperson in understanding clinical trials?
I think there's a few aspects there, isn't there? There's a wide range of background literacy or health literacy with regards to general science in terms of what the drugs or what the treatment's trying to do. There's issues of choice. So you can choose to be on the trial, but sometimes people aren't comfortable with not having the choice of treatment on the trial. And then there's also biases inherent in both us and also patients sometimes in terms of which treatment may be better in the context of a trial. So it can be difficult to negotiate at times, but again, with time and information, I find that the majority of people are able to arrive at a decision that's right for them.
Okay. Well, Darren, from your point of view, someone who's gone through this on a personal experience, what was your journey towards the land of clinical trials?
It was a pretty interesting one, actually, because I'm a bit of... I'm someone who probably doesn't accept the status quo normally, and kind of questioned whether the treatment options that were put forward to me were the best options for me. I was originally offered a clinical trial at the outset of an appointment with my oncologist, and I sort of said to him, that's a 1 in 3 chance of an immunotherapy type drug. I'm not sure that I'm happy to sort of, look at that as an option. So I decided to do a bit of research, and can I tell you, like, trying to find a clinical trial for me was absolutely, earth-shattering stuff. Firstly, it's the clinical papers to try and understand, it's the drugs to try and understand. So it was a pretty big sort of ask to try and, research that. I ended up looking very heavily to the US to get to consult with a number of kidney cancer experts in Dallas, in Texas. So I decided to take a flight and consult with 3 or 4 of those, only to be referred back to Australia. So there you go. Some of the trial drugs that they were suggesting certainly weren't available in Australia, and I think we have this issue all of the time where, some drugs aren't available, and that's just the way it is. But I was told to call a doctor by, I think his name's Shankar Siva. I think he's here at this... I think he is, I'm not sure, but anyway. And he advised me that there was a clinical trial that was being conducted at the PA hospital here in Brisbane, and he said, I'll call my mate David Pryor, and hence the connection. So yeah, it was an interesting journey, to say the least.
Okay, and so...
If I could interject there. So that's a damning indictment on my and my colleagues' ability to advertise these trials and get the message out there. And so my experience with Darren, like an incredibly intelligent, health literate gentleman who had to get a referral to 2 hours down the road from a professor in the US. And so, my experience with Darren was actually the genesis of the theme of this meeting, which is making connections. So the whole idea that we're trying to connect colleagues together, connect patients with each other, connect various organisations with each other, and ultimately connect more people with clinical trials and give them access to treatments.
If the truth be told, I think Dave was probably a bit scared of me, because when I went into the first appointment with him, I had a bio and said, well, here's my bio, let's not go over that detail. And if you can't communicate, there's no point, we're not going to have a conversation. So that was kind of where I sat, and he's like, no, I think we can achieve that. I was like, right, you're on.
I was more probably doing an internal high five, because you'd already done the history for me.
Yeah.
I could just download it straight into the email.
Darren, in thinking about clinical trials, I mean, were you automatically just drawn to that?
Yeah, look, I think you have to understand the context. I mean, my father, I watched him struggle through kidney cancer for 9 years, and he was on a trial drug at the time, which was Sutent, I think, which is the drug that he was on, but that was back in the trial days. So he really struggled, and I was the one who got to watch that process take place. So, trials were very big for him, and, they kept him alive as long as they did. So I was very keen to find a trial that was important to me, and I felt really pleased about the trial that I chose. Not chose, but, I was led to. It was one that I really thought it would suit me, and it sort of, I felt comfortable with it. And I guess that's the thing, when you're choosing a trial, you have to be comfortable with the trial. So, yeah.
So there was that weighing up the potential risks and benefits. What did that mean for you?
Look, well, I mean, I'm still young and relatively healthy, so I was looking for something that wouldn't debilitate me, and that's really important. I still like to, go and eat dinner and go to the pub and have, friends over and all of those sorts of things. So it was important that I had quality of life as well, and wasn't sort of in a position where if I was to take a chemo, I'd be completely grounded, not able to work, not able to function. So they were some of the reasons that I chose the trial that I chose.
Did you do that with a list? Did you write lists?
No, not really. I mean, I think in your own mind, cancer's interesting because you either accept what you have and you think, right, this is a challenge, we now need to address it, and it's very systematic. It's right, it's like life in general. If you've got a problem, you need to try and find a way of fixing it. So for me, it was, okay, here it is. What are we got to do? And let's fix it. So
a very rational, problem-solving kind of an approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to hone in, David, with a particular issue that I've sometimes found patients get confused about, and that's randomisation. And I'm wondering if you could explain what that is to this group and how you talk people through the randomisation that happens in clinical trials.
Yeah, it is a difficult one. So, the basis of it is that there's plenty of things in life where you can look at something and then something happens and you say, well, A plus B has to equal this, and there must be a cause there. But frequently, in many things, and medicine included, it's not the case. And so the only way that you can remove all the biases of people looking at it, having young fit people like Darren on one arm, for example, and someone who's very unwell on another arm of the trial, and just saying, hey, look, we gave the treatment to this guy and he did really well. One of the main ways that we can eliminate that and actually be comfortable and confident that the treatment actually does work and is of benefit, and we can measure the magnitude of that benefit, what's the cost, is through this process of randomisation, which basically says that there's normally two arms of the study. One might get standard of care, one might get new treatment, for example, and there's a process that's completely devoid of any influence from the outside. So it's generally done via a computer, for example, that randomly allocates someone to arm A or B. And there's whether or not you're fit, you're healthy, you sort out something, or whether you've got a financial interest in the institution. Either way, you're randomly allocated to one of those two arms. So there's a few issues around that. One is the wording. Someone hearing random as it relates to their cancer treatment is pretty strange. There's also issues of choice, so not having control. If people are talking, then introducing words like a computer choosing, then that obviously can put people off. So there's a lot of work done around how we can appropriately explain this, and one of our international speakers will be talking about this in the next day or so as well, in one of the sessions. How can we best explain these concepts of clinical trials to patients without scaring them, without making them feel as though there's no choice, and still acknowledging that there's going to be, it's not an inhumane way to do it, it's the most humane way to do it in terms of getting the right answer. So it's individualised, so some people will clearly come understanding certain concepts, and then others you need to pick different aspects of that just to work through, and then again time. So time with the information, written, verbal, family members, and coming back. So I'm running a study which is looking at stereotactic radiotherapy in addition to standard of care for metastatic prostate cancer, and it is one that has been difficult in some centres to say, well, why wouldn't you just add in the new and fancy treatment? So that has been a challenge, but I'd have to say, of the patients that I've talked to, majority of them end up being comfortable going on to the trial, and then there's an even mix who opt not to have any of that trial treatment, or who may wish to pursue something off trial. And so I'm pretty comfortable that for that particular trial we're obviously hitting a good mix, or hitting the balance right in terms of explaining it. But yeah, there are some trials that are a real challenge explaining the concept.
So from your point of view, how did you feel about randomisation, Darren? Or was this a loaded question?
It was a single-arm study.
Look, for me at the time, I guess it's like anything when I firmly had my mind set on what avenue I wanted to pursue. So when I was offered, when I was offered an opportunity to go on a particular trial that had 3 types of drugs, and you could be on any one of those drugs, I thought 1 in 3 opportunities were not really where I wanted to be. So I made the conscious choice to look for a trial that was specific to my needs. And a lot of people don't get that opportunity. A lot of people, they go and, the oncologist will say, this is what you do, this is a good idea, this is what you do, and you go and do it. But, I just didn't, for me personally, I just thought that a 1 in 3 chance was not the chance that I wanted to take. So I wanted to make sure that I did the right thing from the get-go, as opposed to sort of leave it progress. So, yeah.
So the trial that you went on, what were your choices?
I don't know. I can't remember the choices back then, but the trial that I'm on at the moment is stereotactic radiation and pembrolizumab, which is Keytruda. So it's a combination treatment.
The current trial is just a single arm.
Yeah.
Right.
So there wasn't a randomisation for that one, but the initial one, there was obviously a randomisation there, choosing between ones. And sometimes also there's sometimes a tension there in terms of access. So sometimes there's a strong push to say, for example, in a stereotactic trial, why don't you do a different type of randomisation, like 2:1, so that you still got some randomisation in there, but more patients get access. But then I think those sort of things, they can also send a message to say, well, aren't you saying then that this one's better than that one? Then, so it's tricky.
It is complicated.
It is very,
Can you speak up, please?
Yeah, will do.
Just lean into that microphone. David, back to you again. Can you tell us about what the clinical care is like if someone's on the trial? Is it the same as the standard care they'd get in terms of the whole package?
So yes and no. Yes and no. So say for a study that's standard of care versus new intervention, for example, yes, very much that standard of care should be the best available standard of care. But there are a few things that we see fairly consistently with clinical trials, and I guess one thing is more paperwork, more oversight. So there is a little bit of more demand on yourself, but there's also trial coordinators. Yes, we do have really good cancer nurses, nurse navigators, all sorts of ancillary staff, but for clinical trials there's generally a dedicated person that's an additional contact, for example, for Darren to call if things aren't quite working out. The other thing, and this is across the board, but specifically with radiation therapy, I'll use an example of a head and neck cancer trial. And so there was a study looking at a head and neck cancer using radiotherapy plus this new drug, and they're looking to see if there's a 5% benefit using this new drug, for example. But at the end of the day, they didn't find any huge difference between the drug or not. But what they did find is that for people who received compliant, so protocol compliant, high quality radiotherapy versus those that had protocol violations, and it does happen. The radiotherapy might not have been quite of the quality that the trial team wanted. There was a 20% difference in their progression rate, i.e. if you had a protocol non-compliant radiation treatment, you had a 20% higher chance of your cancer coming back. And so on those trials, you can see that if you receive standard of care and had a protocol compliant treatment, you may have been getting a higher quality of treatment potentially than was in the community otherwise. So it's not across the board, and there's a lot of things that play into it, but it is a consistent theme that comes across that clinical trial outcomes in general, the control group or the standard group tend to do better than the generation than before. It's multifactorial, but part of it is oversight. So for example, the trial that Darren's on, I'd design the stereotactic plans and then we'd import them down to Shanker at Peter Mac, and he'd go over them with a fine tooth comb and say, yep, that plan is exactly what I do, or I tweak this and that. So there are some advantages certainly to being in
I'm very pleased
trials.
you did check.
Good to know.
100% pass rate. Didn't change a thing.
Darren, from your point of view, because I think what we've just heard from David is there's some extra burden because you've got perhaps questionnaires to fill out and extra tests to have, but maybe there's extra people that are keeping an eye on you. Did you have a sense of that when you were in the trial?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think the quality of care that you receive whilst on a trial, I think, is exceptional, actually, and certainly recommend it to anyone. I think actually, and this is a personal opinion, but I think you receive better treatment whilst on trial as opposed to off trial. you've certainly got better access to very smart people, like David sitting beside me, but the clinical care nurses are an exceptionally, they're amazing people, and they are on top of things, and it's really nice to, have that communication level with those people, because at the end of the day, you need the team. If you don't have a team of people that you can trust and that you work with and that you work closely with, it starts to become, starts to unfold. So I think having a dedicated care team, I think, is very important.
I'm wondering about your family and how your family felt about you being on a clinical trial.
Like most things in my family, my wife usually makes the decisions. But look, I guess my wife is quite happy, and she was very happy to sort of accept what I decided to do, because it was my journey. At the end of the day, I was the one suffering. Yes, the impact on family is intense, particularly having a young daughter. And looking at those sorts of options, I mean, it's a very nervous time when you have that diagnosis, but she was confident, in the decision that I made, and was very confident in the way that I sort of felt that I should progress. So, the impact is definitely there, but I actually got to make this one, so I was quite pleased. So
your decision was supported by your family?
It was very well supported, yes.
David, I've actually taken extra time. Is that okay?
Sorry.
Because we had extra time, so I've kept this going a bit longer than was planned, but we're okay? All right, I promise 2 minutes, okay. Because I want the 2 last words from our fabulous people here, and David gets to go first so that Darren gets the absolute last word. So David, what advice, so we've got community people here who are really interested in clinical trials, what's your advice to them if they're in a clinical situation and they're interested in this? What should they do?
So always ask a question. Ask if there is a trial available. Ask if there is information available. And then if you're not getting, I guess, an answer that you're happy with, you can ask for other opinions. Look at ANZUP websites, contact consumer advocacy groups. And I guess a final word is get involved as well.
Fabulous. So Darren, what's your message to everyone here?
I guess the message is, one, it's okay to get a second opinion. Don't think that it's not okay. It's absolutely okay to get a second opinion on what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. And I guess the second thing that I would strongly suggest to people is ask what all of the trials are available, not just specific to a particular area. So ask your oncologist, is this only specific to this place? What are all of the trials that would fit into this category? They are the 2 sort of take-home messages that I would suggest.
Fantastic. Does everyone need to go to Texas?
No. I tell you what, it was very interesting, but no, you don't need to.
Did you come home with some Texas boots?
No.
Well, that was an error. All right, I'd just like to say that we should thank David and Darren for sharing this.
Thank you.